What ancient humans did. When someone died, somebody in your life is going to die, and when they do, you already know exactly what happens next. A phone call, a funeral home, a form to sign, a date on a calendar. It's handled. It's practically automatic. But for almost all of human history, death wasn't a phone call. It was a crisis with no instructions, and the way humans responded to that crisis over hundreds of thousands of years is one of the strangest and most revealing stories we have. Because at some point, an early human looked at a dead body, and instead of just walking away from it like every other animal on Earth does, decided to do something about it. That decision might be the first time a human being ever thought about anything beyond the present moment. So let's start at the beginning. A body on the ground. For most of the animal kingdom, death has no aftermath. A dead body is food, or it's ignored, or it's a threat to avoid. Elephants will linger near a dead herd member. Chimpanzees will sometimes carry a dead infant for days, but almost no species does anything that looks like deliberate, repeated ritual. Somewhere in our evolutionary past, that changed, and the evidence says it changed a lot earlier, and a lot stranger than most people assume. In 2013, a team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger found something almost 30 meters underground in the Rising Star Cave system near Johannesburg, South Africa. The remains belonged to Homo naledi, a small-brained, orange-sized skull hominin that stood about 5 feet tall and wasn't even the same species as us. Berger's team argued the bodies had been deliberately placed in oval pits, dug, and then filled in, deep inside a cave system that would have required climbing through total darkness to reach. If that interpretation holds, it means a creature with a brain a third the size of ours was carrying its dead through pitch-black tunnels on purpose. The finding is still disputed. Other researchers have called the evidence incomplete, but even the argument itself tells you something. The question of whether a small-brained hominin could have cared enough about its dead to do this is now a real scientific debate. Not an obvious no. Whatever you conclude about Homo naledi, the picture gets much clearer once you get to bodies like ours. At Qafzeh Cave in northern Israel, archaeologists have documented roughly 25 human graves. Some date back around 100,000 years, and the bodies weren't just discarded. They were positioned, and some were found stained with red ochre, a pigment that has to be deliberately mined, ground, and applied. Red ochre isn't food. It isn't a tool. It doesn't do anything practical. Its only function is symbolic, which means 100,000 years ago, someone already understood that a body could be marked, decorated, prepared for something. And here's the detail that doesn't get talked about enough. This wasn't only us. At Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, the anthropologist Ralph Solecki excavated the remains of 10 Neanderthals between 1951 and 1960 in burials spanning roughly 65,000 to 35,000 years ago. One skeleton, known as Shanidar 4, was found with dense clumps of pollen in the surrounding soil, identified by paleobotanist Leroi-Gourhan. Solecki's conclusion, later hotly debated by other archaeologists, was that someone had laid flowers over the body before covering it. He wrote that someone must have ranged the mountainside gathering flowers for the dead. Decades of argument followed about whether the pollen got there naturally, through burrowing rodents or wind rather than human hands. The debate is still not fully settled, but Shanidar gave us something else that's much harder to dispute. Several of the skeletons show healed injuries so severe that the individuals could not have survived without help. Someone was caring for the sick and the disabled long before anyone died. Caring for the dead, it turns out, may have started as caring for the living. Then, around 65,000 to 42,000 years ago, on the other side of the planet, something even more advanced was happening. At Lake Mungo in southeastern Australia, geomorphologist Jim Bowler found the remains of a woman in 1968, now known as Mungo Lady. Her bones show she was cremated, then her bones were crushed, then burned a second time, then buried. That's not a simple act. That's a multi-stage sequence, a procedure, something someone had to know how to do and choose to do in that specific order. It's considered the oldest known cremation on Earth. Just a few hundred meters away, Bowler later found a second skeleton, Mungo Man, laid on his back with his hands crossed at the pelvis, his entire body dusted in red ochre that had been carried in from a source many kilometers away. Two completely different funerary treatments practiced by the same population at the same time. That's not instinct. That's culture, with options. Here's the part that doesn't make sense until you think about it. You'd expect burial complexity to rise slowly and steadily as humans got more advanced. It didn't. Some of the most extravagant funerals in the entire archaeological record happened tens of thousands of years before agriculture, before writing, before permanent villages. At Sungir, a site on the outskirts of Vladimir, Russia. Archaeologists excavating between 1957 and 1977 found a grave, roughly 34,000 years old, holding two adolescents buried head to head. Their bodies were covered in more than 13,000 painstakingly carved mammoth ivory beads. Experimental archaeologists estimate each bead took about 45 minutes to make by hand, meaning the beadwork alone represents more than 10,000 hours of labor. Beside them lay ivory spears straightened from mammoth tusks, a process that required soaking and heating solid tusk until it could be bent, plus carved ivory animals and hundreds of pierced fox teeth. Researchers studying the boys' bones found signs of extreme physical stress in their teeth and unusually short, bowed thigh bones, evidence they may have lived with disabilities. And yet they were given, by far, the richest grave at the entire site, far more elaborate than a nearby adult male buried with only a few thousand beads. Whoever these people were to their community, status in death clearly wasn't only about strength or contribution in life. So here's the full picture. Around 250,000 years ago, something with a brain a third the size of ours may have already been carrying bodies into total darkness. By 100,000 years ago, humans in the Levant were staining the dead with pigment that served no purpose except meaning. Neanderthals, tens of thousands of years before that line blurs, may have been laying flowers over their own dead, while also nursing the injured back to health. In Australia, one population was cremating some of their dead and ochre-covering others 40-some thousand years ago. In an Ice Age Russia, a community spent 10,000 hours of labor dressing two children for a grave, long before anyone had invented the wheel, the written word, or a single permanent home. Now you get a text that someone died, and the hardest part is picking a font for the obituary. You're mildly annoyed that the funeral home can't fit you in until Thursday. Somewhere in that same week, without knowing it, you're still doing a version of the exact same thing a Neanderthal did 60,000 years ago on a mountainside in Iraq, gathering something meaningful and giving it to someone who can no longer receive it, because some part of you needs to do it anyway. We didn't invent grief. We inherited it from things that weren't even the same species we are. And somewhere along the way, long before we had language sophisticated enough to explain why, we decided a body wasn't just something to walk away from. It was something to answer.